And it's good morning to Melbourne. And we've got a special guest. To say that we're truly international, we got a guest from the US as well. But before we get onto that, I'd like to read out our mission. And our mission, should we accept it, is, just bear with me for a second, I'm getting myself all organised, is to educate and engage with our audience with lively discussions and experts to gain their valuable experiences, tips and benefits of the business and wellbeing practices they can offer. And let me introduce myself. Just bear with me for a second. I'm fumbling a little bit today. But that's okay. It can happen. Yes. And what do? I help individuals, business owners via customized retreats, workshops, and consultations to maximize their feelings of vibrance, purpose, happiness, health, and success. And my special host today is Simon Bowden. So Simon, tell me what you do.
Good morning, Tony. How are you, my friend?
Going well.
For those that don't, yeah, look, it's great to get together. And yes, I agree. We've got an amazing guest today, and I'll introduce him shortly. But for those that don't know me, my name is Simon Bowden, and I'm the owner of Simon Bowden Coaching and also the Marketing Business Coach. I've been an international marketing business coach now for 25 plus years. Which also makes me a master coach, coaching over 10,000 plus hours. My aim is to look at each business that I coach and I identify what's working and what's not working. And I eradicate what's not working and I bring in strategies that do work. And as a result, I love seeing the real potential in their businesses and also in themselves. So I can double or even triple the income in a 3 or 6 month period. I love what I do, Tony, and you know that. And I'm passionate about helping people succeed. So there we are.
So I wanted to... Not only that, Simon was helping me yesterday with my website, weren't you?
Absolutely, yeah, you're not wrong. So, yeah, look, you've got I'm very excited for what you're doing, Tony, and you're moving down to Tasmania. And we're developing a website for you, and the beauty about that website is the fact that you can actually create your own and design your own retreat, which is super exciting for you and super exciting for the people down in Tassie too. So
I'd like to sort of thank you, Simon, for your help with your brainstorming ideas.
No, absolutely. I love it. And you know that. So it's been a pleasure working with you. So, but further ado, what I'd like to do is we have an amazing guest this morning and who's joining us from Greensboro in North Carolina in the US. So I want to welcome Louis Fullagar. Now, Lou is actually the brother of my lovely partner, Naomi. So for those that don't know, there we go. So I'd like to read Lou's bio, if I may. So Lou is the owner and creative director at Specs Attic, which is a social media and digital marketing company operating in the eyewear and optical industry. Lou's also a media marketing director for Loft Eyewear Events, which is a company running eyewear trade shows in New York City and San Francisco. He's a qualified optician by trade and has worked for 13 years as a territory manager traveling the east coast of the US and Canada in the same business. Prior to that, he was a partner in a couple of optical retail outlets here in Melbourne. So let's put your hands together for Louis Fullagar. Welcome, my friend. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you. Just for those, for our viewers here today that are listening in, can you share with us first how you came up with that unusual name for your business?
No, I don't. I mean, it was just honestly just plucked it out of thin air, and I went and checked online that no one else had it, and locked down all the all the things I needed to keep it.
Yeah, good on you. And I particularly love that T-shirt that you're wearing at the moment, Australian Rules.
Yeah,
That's right. I hear you're a Bulldogs man, right?
he's going, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's get straight into it because we've only got half an hour, but I want to jump straight into the first question, and that is, can you explain to us, Lou, what is alpha-1 and antitrypsin deficiency?
Yeah, so it's usually just called alpha-1, but the full name is alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. It's a genetic disorder that some people that have, and basically the alpha-1 antitrypsin is a protein that your liver produces, and when you have enough of it, your lungs are protected and your liver's protected. When you don't have enough of it, your lungs can suffer because they don't have this extra protection. So it's you're very vulnerable to lung diseases and any irritant, smoke, that sort of thing. And it can also build up in your liver. So some people who have it, most people seem to be either liver or lung affected. I was lung affected, or I am lung affected. But other people have end up with having too much of it built up in their livers and have a lot of problems.
Yeah. The next question I got for you is: once you were first diagnosed with this, how long did it take before you started feeling ill and those effects?
So what happened was about 10 years ago, I started to I got pneumonia twice. It was a particularly bad winter, and I felt ill one time, and then about 2 months later, I was ill again for about 10 or 12 days at a time. So at that time, my GP basically sent me to a pulmonologist to be checked out. And they, over the course of quite a few months, they were running a lot of tests to try and find out what was happening.
Yeah.
I previously had some lung issues back in the mid-90s in Australia. And I'd actually had a bit of one of my lungs removed at the time.
Yeah.
And then I was symptom-free for the next 15 years. So I didn't imagine that at the time that had anything to do with it.
I'm just sort of a bit curious on that, about the diagnosis and that. What sort of tests did they give you? And how did that sort of affect you?
Most of it, a lot of blood tests, and then they were testing for certain abnormalities. A lot of like a CT, had to have a CT of my chest. A lot of X-rays, like every couple of months I would be going back for an X-ray.
Right. Okay.
And they had noticed that I had a couple of small spots on my lungs that they were curious about. And I was about to have, strangely enough, they were going to do a bronchoscopy where they go down and scrape a little bit of your lung to see what's down there. The week that I was due to have that, I got appendicitis.
Oh dear.
Ended up in the hospital, getting my appendix out. So,
like you're going through a fair bit. So how were you feeling about all that? So what was going through your mind?
Well, the appendicitis took me by surprise. So I had this other stuff going on, but at the time, because at that point I wasn't super sick with it, I just thought it was something that I would find out about over a long period of time, and they would give me something to fix it, kind of thing. So when I went into the hospital, my wife actually spoke to them and said, he's due to have this procedure done. Can you do it at the same time while he's here? Which I guess they did. So, and it was after that I was diagnosed with alpha-1.
Right.
And even then, it wasn't, at that time, 10 years ago, there still wasn't a great deal of information about it. And even when I thought back to like 1995, I was never told anything about that being a possibility. So,
and when you got that final diagnosis, how did you feel about that? What happened then? Did you feel as though, were you depressed or anything like that? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, just concern. So there's a few different types. So because it's a genetic disease, one gene comes from your mum, one from your dad. Turned out I just had one gene from my father. So my risk And for people like me, the risk is a lot less than someone who has both genes. So when you have both genes, typically they pick it up at birth or within the first few years, because all of a sudden you're a child and you're having liver issues and lung issues. So it's much more easily diagnosed in children at that point. So people like me who just have the half of it, basically, often don't get diagnosed. And in fact, mostly don't get diagnosed. My father actually has it too. And he was diagnosed after me, but has never had any issues his whole life. So it's just, I was just unlucky, basically.
So I was just going to say, Lou, when all this was all happening, what was your job? What were you doing for your income at that stage? And I suppose, when was that turning point when you had to stop work?
So when this first diagnosis came through, I was working as a sales rep, like a territory manager on the east coast of the US and Canada. My job, 4 or 5 days a week, was either flying, driving, all over the place, all over the little backwaters of the US, everywhere. And a great job. If you like to travel, it's a fantastic job. And so over the course, initially I didn't notice any difference, basically. And then what happened over the next 3 to 4 years is I noticed that I was getting more tired. And I was starting to get, every year at like in the winter I would get pretty sick, and completely run down. So I guess the combination of all the travel and running around and driving and all that sort of stuff just kind of started getting to me. And then I guess probably the start of 2015, just say 3 or 4 years later, I started to really feel it. I travelled overseas a couple of times. I went to Europe and back home to Australia. And I noticed during the trips, and my wife noticed as well, that I couldn't walk a long distance. I was getting puffed out just walking up a flight of stairs. And it was starting to get kind of difficult. When I got back to the US, I kept on with my normal job. And in about August, I got really sick and was hospitalised for about 4 days, which was a bit of a scare at the time. And it had been coming. Like, I knew I was getting more run down. I knew I was running out of breath. And then I got home from this trip and I was completely wiped out and ended up in hospital. So,
and just from that, Louis, how did you manage to keep going? Because, it was just one thing after another and you're getting worse and worse. And how did you keep going? What was the thing that kept you going?
It's hard to say. Like, it was depressing, obviously. Not being able to do all the things you want to do. Also, because of that, there wasn't a huge amount of information about what was happening, because every case is really different. So I felt like there was a lot more I needed to know, which was, a bit frustrating. And then landing in hospital was like the ultimate, pick up, right? And we had at the time, we have young kids, so my kids were quite young at that time, 5 and 8. So it was difficult for them and for my wife as well, because up until that point I've been pretty active, and all of a sudden I'm going downhill really fast. So the tail end of that year, from say August to December, got worse and worse. So I ended up, after a couple of weeks of being home that first time, I was back in the hospital about 2 weeks later. And that was happening all the way through October, November, and into winter here, where typically I was getting worse anyway during the normal year. So by the end of the year, I couldn't do the job anymore. So that was my wife was working, but my job was really the main income. So it was quite disconcerting and super frustrating that I couldn't work. So it was a difficult time and very confusing.
So I suppose the big question is, you've obviously started your own business. So how did that come about?
Kind of from necessity, obviously.
Yeah.
Already, I'd started a website for opticians a few years before, and I actually started the first Facebook group, international Facebook group for opticians, back then, in probably 2011, somewhere around there. So I'd already been doing, dabbling in a bit of social media and marketing and stuff like that, and I'm pretty well connected in the industry. So when I couldn't work anymore, my first thought was I should try and do something more at that end of it, like being home and perhaps helping small shop owners across the country. And I knew a bunch of them, obviously. So I ended up reaching out to just 2 or 3 really good friends who had their own stores, and I talked to them about perhaps getting their social media started. A lot of them didn't even have it, or just didn't have the time. When you're a 1 or 2 person store owner, you have that time in your day when the doors open at 10 o'clock in the morning or whatever till 5. There's not a lot of time to do anything else other than run the store. And having had stores of my own before, I kind of knew that was a need, that people needed help without having to hire staff in to do it.
And so, Lou, what sort of challenges did you face going through all that, in terms of like your mental state and your physical and etc. like that? How did you manage to get through it all?
Yeah, I don't know, like just day to day, basically, because from the moment I started working from home, I seemed to begin to get really sick. So in between trying to keep it, the business going, and I got into a rehab program at the local hospital about the same time. So I was with a bunch of other people who had lung issues, and I was actually the youngest person there. And the group of people I went to rehab with twice a week, probably the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. Just courageous, and facing, at the time, I felt much worse than I had, and just trying to keep themselves fit, active, and have a life. Most of them at the time were on oxygen, and a lot of these people weren't able to get a transplant because they were either too sick, or they had other compounding things going on in their bodies, or they just were just too old to be transplanted. So a lot of people there who were terminal, but when I went there every Tuesday and Thursday, they just get up and do it, walk laps, get on weighing machines. I mean, just incredible stuff, and those, I think, more than anything, apart from kids and family motivating you to keep going, the people there, made me feel like I should be doing more anyway, because they were so incredibly brave. And a lot of them have passed on since, and I'm seriously one of the lucky people that
you're still going.
Are you actually still connected to some of those people, Lou?
When we finished, I went through transplant with another friend of mine, and his wife and my wife and I started a transplant group here in Greensboro. Help people. We actually never had a chance to do this ourselves, but to help people who are pre-transplant and post-transplant, just like a support group.
Yeah, good. Good.
Because of COVID, we haven't been able to run it, but when we're back to normal, we hope to get it going again. But that was really important. I wish I had a group like that when I was going through our specific issues, to bounce stuff off or understand a bit more about what was going on. When I started going through this, once I was home, I ended up being diagnosed with COPD. You've probably heard that term before, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is basically, they used to call it emphysema.
Oh,
a couple of diseases. So they told me I was stage 4, I guess, with that. Plus, I had the alpha-1 going on. And then shortly after, I contracted a disease called MAC, which is in the same family as TB.
Oh dear.
And that on top of everything else. And they put me on a 3-drug regimen to beat that. And they told me it usually takes 3 to 6 months, and it took 2 years. By that stage, the lungs were completely destroyed. I think I was down to 21% lung capacity at that point. I was put on oxygen about probably about 8 months after I started coming home or stayed home to work from home. So I was on oxygen every day, and eventually 24 hours a day, I was sleeping with oxygen and using it to get around everywhere. And at the time, I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk from our bedroom in our house to the other end of the house without having a severe breathless attack. So that's hard. That's hard on everybody, especially the kids in my life. So,
yeah, of course.
A lot of for everyone who was around me as well to keep going without, when it seemed it was impossible at the time.
That sort of leads me to my next question, which, how did you feel when the doctors told you that you were going to die?
I think it was October in 2017. I'd been in and out of hospital all year. And the last one, it sent me by ambulance from our local hospital to the Duke Hospital, which is a pretty famous hospital and where the transplant team are in North Carolina. So I spent an hour in an ambulance getting shuttled over there. And then I was basically there from mid-October, and I wasn't getting out. So I think I was only there. They did a whole bunch of tests. About 3 days later, they came in and told me that I had 6 weeks to live.
Wow.
So,
and how did you feel waiting for this, to get a transplant call?
they said I had 6 weeks to live, and I got a transplant call about 3 weeks after that.
That's good. And so that would have been a big relief to you, or were you a bit anxious about that, the transplant?
It's weird actually. Like when they first told me I was gonna die in 6 weeks.
Yep.
You'll see Hollywood movies, right, where someone gets this diagnosis and they have a bucket list and they're going to go and do these things before they die, and it's completely not like that at all. For me, anyway. When they told me, I was in disbelief because I felt like sitting in a hospital bed with all these nurses and doctors keeping me going the whole time. That I could do this for another year, no problem, because I'd already done it for 2 years.
Yeah.
So then, and I didn't feel differently that day than I had done the 8 months previously.
Yeah.
To be told that you only have 6 weeks from that moment was a bit of a shock, really.
Terrible shock.
Took me a few days to process kind of what it meant. In the meantime, they got us going with like a whole bunch of stuff we had to do, like
And so, what did you do to sort of inspire yourself to keep going with that?
By that stage, I was already doing it. Like I for 2 years in the rehab program, and then being inspired by all these other people, I knew that I could keep going. That wasn't even an option, and I knew I wanted to see my kids grow up. I was determined, and even though they said it, like the disbelief in it made me kind of even more determined to prove them wrong. Do you know what I mean?
That's good.
Yeah. But anyway, so they forced us to, told us we had to do some fundraising and try and get some help because the transplant's a pretty big deal. And I had a double lung transplant as well, so it was a full take the old ones out, put new ones in, kind of thing. So I got the call. I waited for 3 weeks, obviously, and 3 kind of nervous weeks. There's actually a transplant list, so you get scored basically on how close you are to dying, how difficult or complicated your disease is, how your age is a factor. So basically what happens is the people who are most sick get the lungs first. And then there's some other criteria like the size of the lung is a factor, and whether they're good or not. So sometimes you can get the call for a lung transplant, go all the way to the hospital, get all worked up for the thing and ready, and then the lungs get delivered and then they're no good. The doctors assess them and say, we can't use them. Then you can't again. That fortunately did not happen to me, but I know other people who had 4 or 5 what they call dry runs, where they were ready for their transplant and mentally, physically, everything. Went to the hospital and then only to be told that 7 hours later that it was not going to happen. I got the call on Thanksgiving Day here in the US, which was pretty amazing. So I was in the hospital, and they gave me leave to go back home, which was an hour away, to be with the kids and the family. And they said basically for possibly the last time. So went home, had a great meal with Heather and the kids, and I was really tired, as I always was. Went to bed about 9:30 and probably in bed about 15 minutes, and my phone was buzzing on the nightstand. Picked it up and it was Duke Hospital, and the lady had a really calm, super calm voice, and she said, "Mr. Fullagar, we've got lungs for you. You need to head over here in an hour or so, and we're all ready." I put the phone in, took a few minutes, to myself, and then I screamed out for Heather, and then everything hell broke loose. We had to organise the kids with our neighbours and get all my stuff ready, get in the car, and drive over to.
Lou, I'm a little bit curious about when you had your lung operation. Did they say to you what was the success rate? Like, it's 50-50 or whatever?
In my case, because I had that secondary or third lung disease at the time, the hospital, they had basically said to me they weren't going to transplant me as long as I had that disease. So I mentioned earlier that it usually takes 3 to 6 months to get it out of your system. It took almost 2 years, and they ended up using an experimental drug as part of the mix. It's a drug that they only have in one place in the US, in Baton Rouge, at the only leprosy hospital left in the US, with patients there. So it was actually a leprosy drug that's no longer in use or FDA approved, that they added to the mix of drugs I was on that got me over the line. So that, fortunately, that worked after all this time, and I was cleared of that lung disease, and that's the only reason that I was able to be transplanted. So, which was again super fortunate, and just again in the nick of time. Everything kind of landed. If you had to, wish for how it would land, it landed perfectly. So I was really, really lucky.
I can imagine.
And by the time the surgery came around, we were at the hospital, like getting prepped and everything. We just had to wait. So they had me all wired up and ready to go, and then we had to wait till they said if the lungs would be ready. So we ended up having a nap on the bed in the.
You did that.
About the morning or something, they came in and said, and it was really quick. They just said, "Okay, you got to say goodbyes. It's time to go."
Yeah.
So Heather and I had a quick goodbye, and they just wheeled me off into a big room with lots of machines that go beep.
Yeah.
For me, for I don't know, a minute, and I was overwhelmed by how many people were there. And then I closed my eyes and up a couple of days later.
Yeah. Wow.
And trust me, back here in Australia, the family were rallied around, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting for the news to come through too. So
you know, it's funny, like you were talking before about how you prepare for it. Like that 3 weeks leading up to it, I kind of, you know, all the medical stuff's going to happen anyway, right? But nothing prepares you for that. Like getting all rushing over there, it was like a whirlwind. Getting there, getting prepped, and then, you know, and a couple of hours later you're in the surgery. So like it's
incredible.
Yeah.
So just quickly, because we're coming to the end really, but how's life been since the transplant?
Yeah, good. Obviously the first month after the transplant was really difficult. Probably the most difficult time we've had as a couple, for Heather and I, and also just for the family, because it was disjointed. You know, we were in an apartment by the hospital. The kids were away back home with Heather's mum. But after that initial 30 days, like being in the hospital, and then another 30 days doing the rehab, I managed to start working again before I came home, which was great. The doctors were really happy that I had something to occupy myself, because most people don't. I was only out of action really for a month from the business, which was pretty incredible. And,
that's amazing.
I warned everybody, like, I'm taking a month off, like that was great. And I'll be back in February or whatever it was at the time. And and that probably helped me a lot, you know, having something to do. And then since then, business has been great. My health has been terrific. And I'm, like I said before, just super lucky that, you know, I was able to be transplanted, and also, you know, thankful for the donor family that made it possible.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great story, Louis. And I'm just looking at the time now. We sort of ran a little bit over, but I think it was well worth it.
Absolutely.
Now, if there's one message that you'd want to tell your audience, what would it be?
It would be, and it was my motto through the whole thing, was just to keep going.
Keep going.
If you just keep putting one step after the other and moving forward or doing something, it can make all the difference. And it absolutely worked for me. You know, there was days where I didn't know what was going to happen the next day. Like, would I be in hospital? Would I be home? Would I be sick? Would I drop dead? Like, all those things. And the only thing you can do in those situations, regardless of what point in your life you are, is to just, when it's hard like that, just make a conscious effort to keep going.
Yeah, good on you, Lou.
And Simon, what was your main takeaway from today?
Well, look, after listening to, I suppose, all the challenges that faced Lou through the whole process leading up to the transplant, it's just, you know, one thing after another after another.
Yeah.
I suppose it's the, you know, the resilience and the determination to want to keep going, and having his supportive family around him, and other friends and colleagues around him that supported him. You know, I think it's the support mechanisms that get people through these types of things. And you know, I take my hat off to you, Lou. It's amazing. It's certainly amazing to know the story firstly, but the story of, you know, the you know, you getting through it and coming out the other end, and seeing what you do today. I mean, you're only a month ago you were telling us about picking up a major contract for your work, which is just incredible, and you know, things are looking up for you, and it's great to see.
Yeah,
so well done.
That's terrific.
And my main takeaway was your desire for life.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing of the whole lot. If you got your family and your children all supporting you, and you had your doctors and nurses, they're all around you. But what was more important was in your heart, that you wanted to keep going. And I loved how you were sort of saying step by step, even if it's a baby step forward, that's enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I loved how you've sort of kept going no matter what. That also reflects that you've got a really strong determination that you're going to make it through.
Yeah.
No matter how so much uncertainty. Like you look in COVID now, what we've got now, it's so much uncertainty out there. But you just go step by step, take every step.
And like for me, it was take a breath, you know, because it was so hard to take a breath for a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Just breathe, relax, and just keep moving.
So,
Yeah,
so Louis, thank you very much. It's been a really great, inspirational podcast. One of our best ones for sure. And on that note, I'm just going to start.
All right.
Well, take a bow. Right? You're my hero. Right. Now, for next week, we've got a special guest coming along. We've invited Maria Davis. Now, she's a spiritual business mentor, Simon.
Wow.
We've never interviewed a business spiritual mentor, have we?
No, first time.
And so she helps heal females and does coaching and professionals, expands their capacity, and is an agency to grow their business to impact the world. So that'll be a one for us not to miss. And so that's scheduled for the 29th of August. So everybody be there and be engaged. You know, we'd love you to come on board. So on that note, we might just say goodbye to everybody and thank you for attending and engaging.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you for our fantastic audience. Thanks, Lou. Appreciate your honesty and working through that with us. And it's an amazing journey. So well done, my friend.
Okay, thanks, mate.